And we're here at the business under bed grandpa. So right now I have the trunk tank just uh, jumpered off basically because I am upgrading the pump, 2,000 gallon per hour rule style Amazon bilge pump. So this just barely fits in this little, it sells as a fuel cell, but works great as a intercooler, expansion tank, reservoir, whatever you want to call it. And this just barely gets inside here and will sit down like that. I will get some grommets. So this used to be for the fuel level sensor. I will run the positive and negative wires up through here with grommets, and then through here will be my outlet because these are not tapped on the inside. This is meant to have an external fuel pump pulling on the exterior. I used to have an external Bosch intercooler pump up in the front that worked kind of the same way. So I would just push in on one and pull back out on another, and it would just be used as a reservoir. Now I need to push out. So what I've got is a 1-inch hose that will go and clamp on to the pump down there and then run up through that large hole that the sensor used to come out of using a -12 AN bulkhead fitting. So this fitting will sit like this. I will put this nut right up to the top along with a couple washers. I'm going to open up the hole on this rubber one to make sure it seals, and this one will be what I put against the bottom there. So that way it'll have a seal, the rubber grommets will seal, and I will seal this all back up. If you do buy one of these little 2.5 gallon fuel cell tanks, make sure you go through and check. I had to add some silicone, as you can see, on the rubber cap. It didn't quite seal right. So make sure you check that because otherwise it will not pressurize, which could cause you issues if you're trying to run a pressurized coolant or fuel system. So right now I'm going to go through with my step bit, get everything back out of here, and I'm going to drill to 1 1/16", which matches the outside diameter of these threads, which is the biggest diameter I need to pass through this hole. This washer is 1 1/8", so it's got a little bit of play, and I will drill out the rubber washer that will be my seal that will go on the top side. And I will be back in a second when I get that done. All right, so I got my 2,000 gallon per hour, not name brand, rule style pump down in there. I got some reinforced flexible hose, ran up to the outlet. I had to use what used to be the level sensor hole for my 12 AN outlet. That red, white, and blue piece is what's left of the little over 1 foot section I got off Amazon for, I think, a little under $10, because that regular braided style 1-inch hose was kinking when I tried to make the bend coming out of the pump and then curling up to be out the vertical outlet. So I moved the caps down to the bottom, which will be my return once it goes into the trunk again. Just to see, this took about, I think this is about a 2.5 gallon tank. It's almost full. I'm going to see how long it takes to kind of fill up most of that gallon water jug there. So we just got it hooked up to this old battery. It's got about 11 volts or so in it, so it should be plenty to kick over this pump. So let's see how the test goes. All right, I'm going to be a little skittish first turning this on, but hopefully I'll give it a couple taps to just prime it. Oh, it's already Sending it. Ready? 3, 2, 1, go. So, watching it pull the level down. It's kind of getting started. And now we're filling. Now we're seeing it go. Oh, yeah. So I'm going to stop it before it overfills because we're going to have some drain out of the hose. And that turned pretty good once it got primed there, because I didn't even prime it when we got started. So I might do it one more time, and I'm going to pour it back in, and we'll see how long it takes now that it's kind of primed. And I'm using RV antifreeze just to kind of give it a little bit of ice prevention, since this car sits outside under the cover like the GXP is right now. That way, when it does see the weather, it doesn't freeze on me. So put the hose back in, and we'll run her one more time. So got my little alligator clamp ready. 3, 2, 1, clamp. And I'm going to disconnect now. All right. So hopefully I threw a timer on there and we could see about how fast it went. You can see some of the hose drained back this way, some of it went back the other way. I am going to call that a good ops check on our new pump, and I'm going to drain this tank out and reconfigure. The trunk tank is now installed. Everything's bolted down. Everything is clamped. You can see one of the hoses is stained. I used to have it running as a PCV line in my truck before I changed it out. But not a big deal. We're not trying to win a glamour contest. And if you look down below, I'm using some grommets to finish the pass through to get the power for the pump out of there. And then we run it down. I'm grounding it right to the chassis, basically right there. And then it runs through the floor drain grommet so that I can run a relayed power 12 gauge wire from the front. Similar to, I actually almost bought another fuel pump relay harness, like I have the Racetronics one up there from when I did the whole PRJ style install of the fuel pump to upgrade the basket and everything years ago, and converted to the Deechworks from the Walbro 255. So big upgrades for the fuel pump hiding under there, and for the intercooler pump hiding in here. I added a pressure relief valve. Don't think it'll ever actually go anywhere, but just for a safety. That way, if something happens, it just burbles out of that release. Before I fill it up, we have our knockoff version of a rule pump, and I've got to finish vacuuming out in here before we fill it up and run it off. That's some RTV when I was reworking things. Got a 1-inch hose. It's got that. I really am a big fan of this stainless reinforcement coiling because you can get the bends you need. This is a little cheap Amazon length of it. You can see the import lettering there, and that runs up to my, I don't think I can fit the camera in there now that I've got the cap on. It runs up to this 12AN bulkhead fitting, and then I put a washer on the jam nut on the bottom, and then a rubber washer on top, and then I basically shaped this with the Dremel, so I had a big washer that helps me lock it down and keep that rubber washer flat. So the only thing I don't like is it's actually threaded backwards. So you have to turn it clockwise to release it. But I'll be able to fill there. It's basically the high point in the system because everything else is below the bumper line going up to the front. It goes through my pass-throughs down there, along the frame rails, and up to the core below the driver's headlight. Down here under the driver's side, the Bosch pump used to be clipped to that bracket that is holding the bottom of the heat exchanger for the turbo intercooler. Those are the transmission cooler lines. And then you can see I made a quick release there so I can drain the system. But if I also wanted to bypass the radiator for race purposes, when I put ice in the tank, I can do that. So I'm just finishing up wiring a relay system, pull straight power off of the fuse box, triggered by the ignition harness. That's what this black line runs up over to the pink wire in the ignition harness that is ignition on power. So we're doing the same thing for, we have already the Racetronics one that triggers off of the fuel pump signal in the back. This one will trigger off the ignition signal, is how I've had it already. I had to upgrade a bunch of the wiring. So I bought a big spool of 12 gauge at the parts store and rerouted all of the power lines for 12 gauge. So that means it goes from here through a fuse and then to the relay on one side, and then comes out of the relay, runs along over there, and then follows the fuel lines back to the pump. And that is also where my fuel pump upgraded harness goes. Okay, now everything's wired up and plumbed up, and I've done a couple test runs. I can show you. Basically, you got the relay strapped up underneath here. I've got a fuse coming off of the main power that then goes through the relay up in here. That's the trigger wire coming from the ignition over here off of the pink wire, and then just grounding the relay, just a little ground so that it can cycle on and off. So it's the system I've got going on. And as far as plumbing goes, we now have the same radiator, the Scirocco Volkswagen one. We're still running from the turbo into the air water heat exchanger and then back out directly to the throttle body. And then we have the power from the fuse box going along the strut brace and then down and along the fuel lines, along with all of our intercooler coolant lines up there. So just strapped up all the way back, and now everything is ready to go in here. So I've got the pump pushing up into this big line, going out, going down the frame rail along one of those, through the system up front, the core and the radiator, and then back here, returning 5 gallons overall in this system, I think. This is a 2.5 gallon tank. There's probably a gallon in the lines and then another gallon or 2 up in the radiator and the intercooler core. So I'm going to keep doing some leak checks, and if I have any issues, I can tighten up this bulkhead fitting some more. It's a little bit hard to get a wrench in there. I have to kind of use a small set of pliers to tighten it and then put a socket on the top side when I have the fitting off. I'm going to show you what it looks like while it's running. So we'll go up here, turn the key on. So I've already done a fuel pressure check, made sure the Deechworks 400 was getting about 60 psi when it primed it, settle at about 50. And now I've got water running through. You can kind of hear it going through the radiator and the core. If we go back here, You can kind of, I'll try and hold still, see if you can see some of the fluid moving. It's kind of hard because, there we go. So this is getting pumped out of the tank by the sump pump that's down in there. A little bit of foaminess in it, but nothing crazy. And then it shoots back up the orange line, which is a return. So after it does things up front, so it'll come out basically cold and fresh, and then after it does some work, it'll kind of cool down a little bit in the radiator and then come back up in and drop back down in the tank for the pump to pick it back up. So it's running. Looks like it's pretty happy. I'll keep an eye out for leaks if I have to work on any of the fittings or anything like that. So I'm sure, because water likes to find leaks everywhere, I'll continue having to chase things, but we'll deal with it as we need to. I think I'll probably have to do a couple of rounds of resealing, I'm sure, because it is water, but that's all I've got for now. People are still popping fireworks out in the neighborhood. I've got a lot of things to do, like set up my new toolbox still. Basically the car's in the way for me not to be able to get to do that yet. I have to pick a spot where I want it, and then I put that sign up. Still got fireworks going on the week after 4th of July here, so. But got stuff put away. I've got my shelves put away, and I've got a big pile of parts there for the next engine project. I've got a bunch of parts inside that I need to put on this, so that will be coming soon. But stay tuned if you want to see what's going on with this. We'll probably fire it up next and get it ready to upgrade. I just made my first ever intense order. I got some push rods for this thing because I've actually been running stock push rods in here, which is not a good thing with how high I rev it. They get a little wobbly. So got some big dog 3/8 push rods and oil restricted. So just stock length. We're going to flex fuel, so I found one of these at the junkyard. So this will be what's next. We'll get it fired up with the tune that's on it, running the 60-pound injector still with the 4-bar fuel pressure regulator. And if all goes well with that, I will switch to the 80-pound injectors, put a tune in for that, make sure it's running fine there, and then as long as I'm happy with how it's running, then we will switch over to ethanol, so that way the main thing I'm worrying about is the air-fuel ratio conversion in the tables. So I don't want to have any hiccups on the car itself, but we should be good to go. So Bad Grandpa getting ready. Hopefully by the time the summer heat cools off, we can hit up the track. I think it's been a little under a year since the last time I went out and did some test runs at the 8th mile. So that's what we're going to do again. And if I can get the 8th mile where I think it's going to be good for going out to a 1/4 mile track, I will travel a couple hours to go do that. But like I said, we've got good things coming along, but this thing's about ready to get fired back up. I want to be able to drive it to work a few times, get the air conditioning sealed back up so it works well, and drive in comfort because it's still fully Buick inside. I've got the interior a little bit gutted, try and cut a little weight when I go to the racetrack, but I might throw that back in there while I give some coworkers some rides. So that's all I've got for you here. Bad Grandpa getting his upgrades and intercooler tank doing its thing. So I'm going to keep leak testing it, keep trying to seal up, keep the water where it's supposed to. Water is never friendly, so that's all I've got for you. Thanks.